Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to come here to the Inland University of Norway. What I've been talking about over the last couple of days is what I would call engaging students and staff together in partnership. And I think it's a wonderful illustration, actually, your university strategy of stronger together. In this case, it's of staff and students working together to enhance the quality of learning and teaching. And we produced a model back in 2014 in which we talked about how you engage staff and students together in partnership. And we brought together a number of literatures which had previously perhaps not been seen to be related. And we produced a model which I think you may be able to see on the screen now, where you'll see 4 overlapping circles. On the left-hand side of that is learning, teaching and research. On the right-hand side is quality enhancement. And they really reflect 2 rather different literatures. The learning, teaching and research one, we often don't use the language of partnership, but we've been doing partnership for several years, and I'll expand on that in a moment. And we've scaled it up where whole classes, whole cohorts can be involved. On the right-hand side, on the other hand, it's relatively newer, but a different body of literature, and that's about how students are involved in partnership with staff to produce quality enhancement. And then it's quite possible that only a handful of students may be involved. There are examples now where it's been scaled up to well over 100 in some places, but fairly rare. So you'll see on the diagram that there are 4 overlapping circles, and they're deliberately overlapping because many initiatives involve aspects of more than one of the areas. In the top left-hand corner, you'll see that it's learning, teaching and assessment. A good example of that, which many people do, is where students are involved in peer learning or peer assessment or peer mentoring. Where, for example, in the latter, when senior students may support junior students to understand how to integrate into the university, it's more a pastoral thing, or B, be linked into particular courses and actually even teach the course. So, for example, there's a course in psychology at Stirling where senior students actually teach the statistics course to the junior courses, and the tutor, in a sense, oversees and supports the senior students in undertaking that role. And because they're closer to learning about statistics, they find that's a more effective way for the first years to learn. In the bottom half of the diagram, another very common area which we do, and that's involving students in subject-based research and inquiry. Very common to have inquiry-based learning or research-based learning integrated into courses. Let me give you just one example. In Sydney, Australia, Charlotte Taylor, for many years, who teaches biology, has taught a course which has 1,500 students taking the course. She has to teach over 3 lecture theatres when she gives lectures, so that it's transmitted one to the other. But all 1,500 students undertake a research project during that course. Now Charlotte's an asthma specialist, and she does something very simple. She gives each of the students a Petri dish which they have to expose for the relevant time, 8 minutes or whatever it is, wherever they're living in the Greater Sydney area. And the students have to do this. They collect the data. They have to identify then the spores which they've collected from the Petri dish and compare that with the research on which of the spores are associated with asthma. And then they pool all their data together, having done various quality checks that they've identified them correctly, into a GIS map, which shows very clearly that the central business district of Sydney is where the concentration of spores associated with asthma. Now, all that data goes into a database in the States, so they contribute to an international research project. So the students actually go home at Christmas and say, look, Mum, I've been solving the problems of asthma. It's one of the few courses they remember 20 years after having done it. But the trick is actually how Charlotte has designed that course, because it's very easy to do a course where you collect lots of data, but not much learning takes place. And it's the quality of the learning design which is really crucial. And what Charlotte has done, I think, is to design a course where there's a lot of learning, because students have to read the literature about asthma and the causes. They have to identify how to collect data. They have to identify how to process that data and identify the spores that are associated. They have to learn how to do the GIS. And then very critically, in their small groups, they discuss with their tutor what the implications of that are. So there's a lot of learning taking place. But in terms of inquiry-based learning, what I think is really significant is the creativity of Charlotte. She's turned a question on its head. It's not what can I can't do because I've got 1,500 students. It's what I can do because I have 1,500 students. And that's going to involve some sort of mass data collection. And simply turn that question on its head, what can you do because you have large numbers, see it as an advantage, I think is a great example of it. Then in the bottom right-hand corner, there's another form of research and inquiry, and that's when students get involved in investigating the teaching and learning that they receive. Traditionally, that's what staff do, but increasingly growing now around the world is students often working with staff on what I'd call scholarship of teaching and learning projects. Good example is Exeter University in the UK, where they, for over 10 years now, they've been doing an exercise that they call change agents. It started 10 years ago with I think it was the Pro-Vice Chancellor then, invited students to investigate some learning or teaching activity that they were interested in, that they'd experienced, with the view to, on the basis of research evidence, to make some proposals about how it could be enhanced. Now, the trick that she did was to give them pretty free rein, a bit of support, perhaps a master's student if they were perhaps, say, in engineering and didn't know how to do a focus group on how to collect data in that mode. But the deal was, having given that resource, that they would present their findings and their recommendations to a cross-university conference. Not just with all the students doing the courses and the facilitator, but the real trick was she had a 3-line whip out for all senior management. So heads of departments, deans, even the Vice-Chancellor himself, if he was Steve Smith, who was in town, would attend that meeting. Just give one specific example. This would be about 8 years ago now. When clickers first came in, it's a sort of voting system where students can give their reaction to different things which are happening in the course and their understanding of topics. The students said, well, we've never come across this. And their project they wanted to do was to investigate the student experience of the use of clickers in the classroom. And when they presented their findings at the cross-university conference, they came up with so many benefits that the students were telling them that encouraged their learning to take place, that the Dean of the Business School stood up at the end of the meeting and thanked them and said, look, you've convinced me. Tomorrow I'm going to order 4,500 clickers so that every undergraduate student, taught master's student, can have their own personal clicker and take to every class, so that it can really implement that technology across the institution. Nowadays we just use mobile phones. We have different ways of doing it, but I think it's a lovely example actually of how students can make a change, and fairly significant change. And my bet is that if a member of staff in the business school had knocked on the dean's door the day before, he wouldn't quite got that reaction from the dean of spending that amount of money. So students can sometimes make changes which staff can't. And then finally, in the top right-hand corner, there's a circle there where we talk about students involved in curriculum development and pedagogic consultancy. I'll just take the last one to give an example of. And probably the best example is from the work that Alison Cook-Sather does at Bryn Mawr College in the States. And she set up a system, been running it now for 8 or 10 years now, where she invites students, usually students of minority backgrounds, so it's usually black students in her case, the students who often get missed out from these sort of ventures, to volunteer, and they get paid, to sit in classes of members of faculty who invite them in. and they're not students that they would teach, they will be from a different discipline, and that's important. And they negotiate with the member of faculty what they're going to look at. So, for example, if a new member of faculty is introducing a new course this year and he wants to investigate how his students are learning and responding to these new ideas, the consultant sits in the class, observes what's happening, and critically will go and sit with the students and have a cup of coffee with them and have discussions which the member of staff, the member of faculty would never have. And then each week they would report back to the faculty member what they found and their recommendations. And then they would say, well, what do you want me to look at next week? And that continued over a term. So they actually act as a consultant to them. And the evidence is that they both sides gain an enormous amount. And the students are supported by Alison. She meets them weekly as a group to say, how do you give feedback to staff? Because you may be being a little critical about them sometimes. How do you do that in a way which is responsive and responsible? So again, there's learning on that. And that model is now being played out to about 25 different universities in different countries and different disciplines around the world. So it's a very successful model. And then in the core of the model, you see the terms partnership, learning, community. That's the glue which brings these different ideas together. That's very much about how we operate in partnership. And you see in the outer circle of the diagram, there are a series of values, which are the values which may underlie that principles, underlie the way the partnership initiative operates. And what I often advise is that if you're starting a partnership which is going to last, say, for a semester or a whole year, put those values on the table right on day one and discuss them. Which of these can we operate in? Which are feasible to us operate on? So it's very clear. It's managing expectations, but also setting down some benchmarks about how to operate. And then perhaps halfway through the project, you revisit them and say, are we doing what we said we would do? And that helps to break down the power relationships between staff and students. And it's often the case, it's only until about week 3 the students actually realise that you're taking them seriously and wanting them to act in a partnership situation. And that changed the dynamics. And ideally in a partnership, it doesn't matter who the staff are, who the students are. It's to value everybody in the room, everybody who's involved, and to say you've got something to bring to the table. The staff member will have expertise in the subject and the teaching of it. Students will have expertise in being students, and they have life experiences to bring. So it's just valuing and respecting the different views they have. And I think that's how partnership works. And I think it could work very well here at the university, of stronger together.